Now bring everyone to order, please. The final item of business is a members' business debate on motion 22652 in the name of Liz Smith on residential outdoor centres. And this debate will be concluded without any questions being put. Would those members who wish to speak in the debate, please press the request to speak buttons, or if anyone is remote, press R in the chat function. And I call on Liz Smith to open the debate, please, for around 7 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I immediately say thank you to all those who signed the motion and to all those who are contributing this evening. And I want to lead this debate, if I may, with two very personal experiences in mind. The first from my own teaching days in the 1980s and 1990s, when I was very privileged to take charge of several outdoor education projects across Scotland, and secondly, as an MSP for 13 years, privileged to be on the receiving end of many emails over the years which have told me just how much constituents have valued the opportunities which outdoor education has given to their families. And that family value is surely exemplified now by the fact that around 19,000 people have signed the Save Our Scottish Outdoor Education Centres petition, by the fact that when the Scouts advertised on Facebook on the 15th of September that 144 places were available for outdoor activities, they were gone within just a few minutes. By the fact that the Loch Eel Outward Bound Trust's offer of 800 venture days at Ullswater in August was also taken up within a few hours. And it's also why there's been very considerable media interest in this issue the past few days, whether via the BBC, STV and Channel 5. Now, that hugely popular appeal of outdoor education comes as no surprise to me. Aged 15, before my first residential trip, I can remember being anxious about being away from home for the first time, about the fact that I didn't really know very many people in the group, including the 2 members of staff who would look after us, or what to expect in a remote environment, far removed from anything with which I was familiar. When I returned, the anxieties with which I'd started out had been completely defeated and replaced with a new mood of confidence, of self-discipline, and a much deeper understanding of who I was. I could cook, put up a tent, build a campfire, fish and walk, climb the hills for hours on end. But more importantly, I learnt about what it means to be part of a team, about leadership, and about valuing friendship. I didn't know it at the time, but these 2 weeks were responsible for my lifetime's enjoyment of and commitment to the outdoors. And in bringing this debate to Parliament, I want to ensure that the opportunities I was afforded will still be there for generations to come. The evidence about the benefits of outdoor education is both widespread and compelling. And I want to pay tribute to all those individuals within the outdoor education sector who have enriched the lives of our young people, providing them with both a knowledge and an appreciation of the environments and communities very different to those which they are both familiar, for building their confidence and self-esteem, and for developing in them an understanding of responsible behaviour and how to deal with new challenges and manage risk. And in an age, particularly during COVID-19, when there is growing national concern about young people's health and lifestyles, when there is also concern that for many children, especially in the deprived areas, they do not get the same opportunities as their counterparts elsewhere, and when there is concern that in some local authorities, the current feeling is that they very much need to cut back on this kind of activity because of the stringent financial circumstances. Deputy Presiding Officer, it is time to treasure our outdoor education centres in the same way that we treasure our schools. But as the circumstances stand just now, it is predicted that half of our 36 outdoor centres are likely to close by autumn 2021. And if they do, they will likely not return. And we simply cannot allow that to happen. Every single outdoor group to whom I've spoken these past 2 weeks, and I'm grateful to them all, tell me that we must act now if we are to save our outdoor education centres. It's an extremely blunt warning, but when you see the details of the financial situation currently facing many of these centres, in local authorities of every political hue, you realise just how desperate the situation actually is. And it is especially bad in some of the most rural, remote locations. In many cases, they haven't even been able to benefit from single days of outdoor education. Nor is it just land-based outdoor education centres which are at risk. Ocean Youth Trust Scotland, which provides a floating outdoor education centre and which has looked after 14,000 young people over the last 20 years, many of them with very specific challenges, that's not been able to sail any boats all of this year. And of course, we know that schools in particular are finding it very difficult to afford the necessary coach hire or the fees that are required for specialist assistance, whether that's canoeing or rock climbing or abseiling. And in August, the Scottish Government advised local authorities that residential school trips should not take place, and that decision will not be reviewed until December at the earliest. That is a hammer blow. 2.3 million of lost income for the Scouts alone. For the Scottish Outdoor Education Centres, 50 jobs are at stake, despite the fact that they have lots of inquiries for bookings in 2021, which make up almost £500,000 of income. But they can see, with the current growth in COVID-19 and the ongoing uncertainties, that schools and local authorities will be very unlikely to send youngsters to the outdoor education centres for the rest of this term and possibly for the spring term. So it is a desperate plea from all of them for the collective will of government, of this Parliament and other institutions to help them find the necessary funds to tide them over until next summer to prevent any closures, because I repeat, if these centres close, they will likely not open again. Now, in the 2007 Scottish Parliament election manifesto, the SNP said this, and I agree. Scotland has one of the most spectacular and challenging outdoor environments in the world, and all of our youngsters should have the opportunity to experience it. We will work towards a guarantee of 5 days outdoor education for every school pupil. And to start that process, we will provide an additional £250,000 each year to support the expansion of 5 days subsidised outdoor education, targeted at children from our most deprived communities. As I said, I agreed with that. And I also agreed with John Swinney just recently when he said that he was very keen to ensure that residential outdoor education experiences must remain part of the embedded curriculum for excellence. But can I remind the Scottish Government that as part of the Scottish budget negotiations way back in 2009-10, a £1 million commitment to outdoor education was made. It's there in the budget lines. And it was supported by several Scottish sports stars at the time, led by Gavin Hastings, who wanted to see combined support from government, from business and from philanthropy via the Trusts Act to ensure that all pupils had access to at least 1 week of residential outdoor education by the time that they were 15. In 2008, we were advised by the SOEC that that would probably be around £160 per pupil. So now I expect it probably is nearer 250,000. But the outdoor centres told me at the time that they never really saw that money. And so it is really time to focus all our minds. This is not a party political issue. This is for all of us. We must find urgently the financial assistance to allow the outdoor education centres to remain. And that is the purpose of this debate. And there is an additional COVID context to all of this. If outdoor education is a priceless asset in normal circumstances, it is never more needed now. We are all too well aware of how many young people have struggled through this crisis, missing several months of school, feeling lonely and isolated in many cases, and generally less sure about themselves and their own abilities with the impact that it has for mental health. Presiding Officer, this Parliament, whether in the Chamber or in committee, is all too accustomed to debating the progress of education in numbers. The number of teachers, the number of SQA passes, the percentage increase in literacy and numeracy, class sizes, when much more often we should be turning our attention to the qualitative aspects of education, aspects which can't be reduced to numbers, but which I would argue are intrinsic to what can be defined as good quality education. I have no doubt whatsoever that education in an outdoor environment provides one of the most valuable and most rewarding learning experiences for a wide range of pupils, no matter what their backgrounds are or their abilities. To lose that precious asset is an unconscionable thought, and I hope the Scottish Government hears this evening the loud message that is coming from the sector. If we don't get action on this, then they will not exist. So I urge the Scottish Government to work with all of us to find the necessary funding and ensure that they remain. And I move the motion in my name.
We'll now move to the open debate, and can I ask, I've got a lot of speakers, so can I ask members to stick to no more than 4 minutes, please? And I have Bruce Crawford, followed by Jamie Green. If you can hear me, Mr Crawford, if you would just hold on a wee minute. We can't hear you. So, would you, no, we are silent.
I'm not now.
Oh!
For once, I'm not silent.
Well, I'm really pleased to hear it. So if you would like to start again.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome this debate and thank Liz Smith for bringing it to the Chamber. The outdoor facilities under discussion this evening have formed a small but important part of my life for my family. This is because I'm a father to 3 boys, now grown men, who benefited from the unique experience of outdoor centres. In fact, Presiding Officer, I probably deserve some sort of medal for taking each of my sons separately to Fordorfills in Fife for the father and son Cub Camp weekend. For those not familiar, Fordorfills is an excellent Cub and Scout adventure centre. I have to admit though, no matter how many times I was there, the rope ladders and vertical climbing challenges were just as scary. I'm a big believer in these types of activities for young people. They help build confidence, interpersonal skills and general resilience. They also support an appreciation of the natural world, quite often giving young people a chance to learn about different plant species as well as wild animals. They take young people away from video games. It's not a criticism of video games. They too serve an important purpose. But it's good to find a balance, and our great outdoors, which I think we can all agree, can often be so easily lost. The range of activities offered are often mapped to the outcomes sought through the Curriculum for Excellence, demonstrating pretty effectively that learning can be fun. In my own constituency, we have the spectacular Aberfoyle setting that is the home to the Doonans Outdoor Education Centre at the heart of our Lomond and Trossachs National Park area. I visited the site a number of times, most recently last year, for an update on some of the developments they've been working on. The centre can now accommodate over 150 people in 3 excellent cedar wood chalets. The groups of young people who are lucky enough to visit such an outdoor education centre get a very wide range of outdoor experiences to enjoy and learn from. It is a truly exciting and memorable place, and one that I hope will continue to offer such a unique experience for many, many generations to come. That will be particularly true post-COVID, when as a nation we seek to try to help heal any wounds in our young people. For this debate, I was contacted by a number of organisations. This included the Save Our Outdoor Centres campaign, who pointed to the financial difficulty of residential centres. I also received a detailed briefing from Scouts Scotland, who I know have put a fair amount of work into advising on guidance for the reopening of such facilities. I too am disappointed it's not yet deemed safe enough to open residential facilities such as these. However, I accept the role of scientific advisors in this process, with the absolute priority being to protect public health. So, in conclusion, the motion we're debating points to a petition looking to Scottish Ministers to provide financial support to outdoor residential centres. I know the Scottish Government will do what it can in this regard. But beyond party politics, I don't generally find a lot to disagree with Liz Smith on. She's a member of this place I have a lot of respect for. However, Liz Smith, like others, is well aware that the COVID crisis meant that unprecedented amounts of funding have had to be pumped into our NHS and the economy. Much of the money is committed from UK state borrowing, a power which unfortunately Holyrood does not yet have. I therefore hope that Liz Smith and other members will therefore recognise the reality of the devolved financial restrictions means that in all likelihood, any additional support may also require to flow from the Treasury. I'm fully on board with finding solutions to supporting these important centres, but we need to be serious and realistic about what these solutions are to be. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Jamie Green, to be followed by Daniel Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I start Liz Smith for bringing this debate to the Chamber? When she said she was having a members' debate, I was proactively pleased to participate, no least because of my education brief, but also because of the importance they play in my own region. We will hear about the important role that they play in young people's lives, and I hope one that they will continue to play in the future. But that is seriously at risk. Outdoor learning goes far beyond what can be taught in a physical classroom. We take children away from their Instagram accounts and their PlayStations, and they stick them in an environment where they have to reconnect with nature, with the great outdoors, but more importantly, reconnect with each other. Friendships are made, new skills are acquired, self-confidence is boosted, and lessons are learned that may last a lifetime. There's no end to the benefits. But if, and indeed when, we come out of lockdown and life becomes normal, education centres will have a massive role to play in young people's life, but only if they exist. And we know that, as the previous member said, that the coronavirus has had an impact on things, but the physical impact is nothing like the mental impact that the virus is having on young people. In my view, they've been disproportionately affected, and the vast majority of these young people have seen their mental health challenged, feelings of social isolation and loneliness. It's okay sitting in front of a computer game, but you need to interact with other human beings, no least at that age. And the great outdoors, I think, provides that much-needed clarity of mind, fresh air, and some good old-fashioned exposure to the elements. And that's not always achievable on a day trip. Therefore, that highlights the importance of residential stays. Now, I accept that the unavoidable restrictions of late have rendered many of these places of learning out of bounds for obvious reasons. But this is financially insufferable for them. I'm privileged to have a number of excellent outdoor education centres in my region, which give children, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds on the mainland, valuable experiences. On the Isle of Arran alone, there are 2 outdoor centres, the Lochranza Outdoor Centre, which has been around for over 45 years, and the Arran Outdoor Centre in Lamlash. On the mainland in Dalry, there's the Blair Activity Centre, a girl guidance centre in the heart of Ayrshire, which has made an immeasurable contribution to many thousands of young girls' lives. Just north of Helensburgh is the Blair Varrick Outdoor Education Centre, which is nearly 50 years old as well. But they're in dire straits. Let's not beat about the bush. They're heavily reliant on these residential visits for a huge proportion of their income. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, they're being told that residential trips cannot resume until at least spring next year. But on the other hand, they're being denied the full financial support they need to guarantee their very existence. And without support, wherever it comes from, we can have that debate, these fantastic centres will be lost forever. And we've heard, as Liz Smith said, from the industry that as many as half could close. That's not just a warning, it's a prediction. It's not as simple either as just extending one measure of support, such as schemes like job retention, as important as they are. The costs of keeping a centre running go far and beyond that. As is the case with any business, running costs are about more than just people costs. As we know, beyond outdoor learning centres, the Scouts and Girl Guidance services themselves are under very threat, facing the most serious challenge in their history. And we've already seen the first casualties of that, and I hope that's not a sign of things to come. But we cannot, in good conscience, let that happen. So I urge the Scottish Government to listen. This is not a hobby, it's not fringe, it's not extracurricular. This is mainstream education. It's the vital cog in the wheel of attainment, of health, and in broadening the mind. Once they're gone, and that would be a terrible shame on all of us. So let's not make that happen.
Daniel Johnson, please, followed by Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I begin by echoing the thanks to Liz Smith for securing this debate, because this is a crucial issue that will affect our ability to educate our young people in a very fundamental sense. At the start of last century, we had a transformation in our thinking about the outdoors as it relates to education, with figures like Kurt Hahn and others really leading the way in arguing that outdoors shouldn't be something extra to education, but they should be core. That by learning about the outdoors, that one learns about self-resilience, and importantly, that through learning about the outdoors, about how to live in the outdoors, that one gains a more holistic sense of learning than one does by merely learning in the classroom. And 100 years later, I think it was a very bold and important move to include these understandings in the Curriculum for Excellence, as indeed Bruce Crawford stated in his speech. And we may use some different language to those words and phrases used by people 100 years ago. But very much those ideas of breadth and about holistic learning are absolutely embedded within Curriculum for Excellence, that outdoor learning should no longer be regarded as extracurricular, but core to the curriculum. And that is the irony, that given that we have so recently, I think, made that step forward, embedding these understandings, that outdoor education is absolutely essential to learning, not peripheral to it, that we find ourselves in a situation where outdoor education and outdoor education centres are faced with such a threat as they are today. And let's be clear, the benefits of residential outdoor education, and I think it's important to emphasise the residential nature, I think were brought to life by Liz Smith in her remarks. We've all experienced the richness of the learning experience through camping trips, hiking in the hills, and through the application of knowledge in the outdoors, that we learn a much broader set of skills, true life skills. And indeed, we now know the important role that being in the outdoors and learning about the outdoors has on mental health. And critically, the Curriculum for Excellence itself says that that provision should be mixed provision, that it should not be simply provided by the schools. And that is why the crisis faced by these organisations and the potential loss of these centres is so serious in terms of our ability to deliver outdoor education as a whole. And let's be clear, this crisis is pronounced and it is serious. But some of these organisations saying simply another 6 months, let alone another 12 months of the restrictions that they're facing will cause them to be in absolute crisis and the loss of assets which have taken decades to build up. And the consequences are stark. We will lose skills. Staff are already being consulted with regard to redundancies. Organisations are looking at closing centres in order to meet the costs that they have been unable to avoid through the months of lockdown. And let us also be clear that the Scottish Government interventions have fallen short. And I understand what Bruce Crawford said in his remarks. There is not limitless finances available. But let us also be clear that the Third Sector Resilience Fund fell short when it came to outdoor education organisations. When they made their applications, they were told they did not qualify. So we need the Scottish Government to urgently look again, to either extend those schemes or come up with new schemes, provide the support that these organisations need. Because if we lose them, as Liz Smith put it, we will lose them forever. Thank you.
Maurice Corey, followed by Mark Ruskell.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I too thank my colleague Liz Smith for leading this debate today and bringing it to the Chamber. I join in recognising the urgent challenges currently facing the sector, which have all been well highlighted so far, and particularly by the ongoing public campaign. The residential outdoor activity centres have long been a vibrant feature of Scotland's education system and a very important jewel in the crown. But the pressures of the pandemic have reduced many of these centres to a precarious and fast diminishing existence. The rich experience and skills gained through outdoor learning goes far beyond the classroom, and young people learn to harness emotional, social and employability skills that they can use for a lifetime. Well, I talk here today and speak here to you as a former student of Outward Bound Trust in Murray, an area known well to my colleague Edward Mountain on my right, where I spent 4 weeks in the Outward Bound school there when I was a young lad as a general apprentice for J.P. Coates Mills in Paisley. And it was part of their programme to build our character. And every one of us, all 50 apprentices, were sent to the various schools around the UK. But I drew the short straw because I was due to go in May, but I was asked if I'd go in January. And if anybody knows Berghead in January, you know exactly what you've got to put up with. Nevertheless, I had a wonderful time, and my memories are of arriving at Elgin Station, met by the lorry from the Outward Bound Trust, the last cigarette going out the back of the truck, the last pint of beer being consumed before we left the station, to be then confronted with a bunch of my team who were police cadets, building site apprentices, young people in care, RAF cadets and more. The activities we had were sailing in the Murray Firth after breaking the ice in Hopeman Harbour, swimming, running from Berghead to Hopeman to then dive into the pool at Gordonston to do our personal survival activities, rock climbing, abseiling, and we also had debates and discussions in the evenings. And I can tell you now that it stood me extremely well throughout my career, and I still go back to the days when I had that and what friends I made. And I then, from that experience, 10 years later, as a factory manager in Glasgow at our family drinks company, I sent one of our young managers on that very course. In these days, it was in Lochiel. And I must say, he went out a boy and came back a man. And I think it was tremendous. So there are lots to be gained. But can I move on to another area, is of course, which is close to my heart, is the Sea Cadets, Army Cadets, and also the Air Force Cadets. Because we incorporate in our training 2-week camps per year. And these are crucial. They're residential camps, crucial to the development of the cadets. And of course, we're lucky that we managed to fund that through our other means. But the outdoor centres who stand independently under current guidelines can provide day trips only. But the lack of cost provision from schools and parents, coupled with the practicalities of organising travel to rural spots, has limited the uptake considerably. In any case, most centres are heavily dependent on residential visits for their income, which day trips can and are unable to provide. Now, my own region of West Scotland, and along with my colleague Jamie Green here, is home to quite a few of Scotland's residential activity centres. And if I can just say, one of them is the Ocean Roost Youth Trust, which Liz Smith referred to earlier on, based out of Green. A fantastic operation and really worthwhile going. And I've considered, even in the past, sending one of my daughters on that to serve before the Mass. No, seriously, you would have a good time. Then there's Ardmay House near Arica, which provides residential activities for up to 2,500 children each year, which opened in 2003. And however, like many other activity centres, Ardmay House has felt the catastrophic impact of their business going down recently and obviously during this current period. So unfortunately, this is not a rare case, and the charity Children First, who drew my attention to another centre at Ardroy, which helps young people and their families affected by mental health challenges to better support children in their recovery from traumatic experiences. And therefore, the COVID-19 has called for innovative and creative activity by the staff and how they can take their services forward. The best alternative has been to keep the sector running in deploying staff to work directly with the schools and local authorities to deliver outdoor learning and equip teachers to do the same. But this can only be done, Deputy Presiding Officer, with financial assistance, not just to survive the crisis, but to actively thrive. And as Jamie Green mentioned earlier, the Blair Vaddock Centre, very close to my own home in Helensburgh, is an absolute outstanding example. And we managed to save it, fortunately, from it being closed by the Glasgow City Council. And I'm glad that cross-party people realised that that should carry on. And the team there worked to deliver outdoor learning centres, firstly to hub schools in Glasgow, and develop it on to having residential times at the school. A prime example of other ones are many, like the Scouts Centre at Lochgoil Head, and efforts are being made all along by these outdoor residential centres to actually stop closure and look for the help that we can get from government. And to conclude, Deputy Presiding Officer, as I got reminded just now by my colleague, financial support from the Scottish Government will clearly be life-saving for that sector. And I speak from personal experience, because we must not throw the jewel in the crown out. And I have that experience of the Outward Bound Trust to my name.
Thank you, Mr Corrie. Can I say I'm glad it was only 4 weeks you were there for. We might have been here a lot longer. You have Mark Ruskell to be followed by Liam MacArthur, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I say at the outset, I really warmly welcome this debate and thank Liz Smith for bringing it forward. And perhaps it's a timely bridge between her previous portfolio in education and her new role as environment spokesperson. I very much welcome her in that new role. The huge outpouring of support for Scotland's outdoor education centres and their staff in recent weeks really shouldn't surprise any of us. The permanent closure of the Ardionic Centre near Killin, for example, came as a huge blow to schools who are planning to take their pupils there this year. And other centres like the Belmont Centre in Strathmore Valley or the Doonan Centre near Aberfoyle haven't yet reached that point of crisis, that they and many other centres are struggling, and people are genuinely worried about the future. Now, many members have already spoken about the life-changing opportunities outdoor education provides, and for me, It was a vital spark which helped light my love of the environment, and it continues now with my own children and their experiences. So the value of such an offering, outdoor education, cannot be overstated, but nor can the scale of the threat facing the organisations that provide these services. Many centres are working hard at the moment to move to alternative, non-residential models to ensure that some form of nature-based education can continue during this COVID crisis. But that will need the strongest level of support from both government and councils to keep the outdoor education workforce working together over the next year. But it is also clear, though, from speaking to many people in the sector, that without funding to effectively mothball centres in the short term, there is a serious risk that operators may be forced to offload buildings, centres and other facilities. Now, members will be aware that many of these buildings have got long histories. They're often donated and their resources built up through decades of fundraising and sweat equity. The cost of setting up these centres from scratch again in 2020 would be absolutely astronomical, running to millions and millions of pounds. So as well as providing support to deliver alternative models of education in the short term, there must be funds put in place to mothball our outdoor centres for the short term. And this would ensure that providers aren't forced into a position where they'll need to sell their assets and can maintain facilities for outdoor education to resume once this pandemic has passed and residential visits can be confidently resumed again in full. I'm talking here about the need for thousands of pounds of staffing support, utilities and minor repairs, rather than the millions of pounds needed to start from scratch and rebuild centres that have closed or been sold off. It's quite clear that these centres cannot be lost. If that happens, outdoor education will be devastated. Each centre is as integral a part of the education estate as a school building. We don't take decisions to close schools lightly. We shouldn't allow these centres to close by an unforeseen circumstance. Part of a green education-led recovery out of the COVID crisis, the opportunities for young people to discover the outdoors and themselves again could not be more important and vital for their future. If we don't act now, that opportunity will be lost to the generations who absolutely need it the most. So we need to act and save our outdoor centres.
Liam MacArthur, followed by Jeremy Balfour.
Thanks very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I start, like others have, by thanking Liz Smith for allowing this debate to take place. I know from our time together on the Education Committee, she has been a long time and passionate advocate for the outdoor education sector, and thank her for giving Parliament this opportunity, an opportunity to highlight, as many have already, and as the motion does, the significant contribution that outdoor centres make to enriching the lives and the educational experience of children and young people across Scotland, but an opportunity too to underscore the serious and legitimate public concern over the future of such centres, many of which face the prospect of closure in the absence of further government support and an ability to operate. And we simply cannot afford for that to happen. On a personal level, I declare an interest. I benefited hugely from access to outdoor education, as indeed did both of my sons, maybe not to the same extent as Maurice Corrie and in more temperate climates, but nevertheless, growing up in Orkney, some might see this as inevitable, but that, I think, would be to underestimate the part played by teachers, by youth workers, by volunteers and others working in this sector. Bringing outdoor education alive, to inform, to engage, to enthuse, takes real skill, understanding and commitment. The outdoor centre in Hoy, in my constituency, has come a long way since I stayed in its rather more basic predecessor hostel back in the 1980s. But unchanged is the impact that trips to these centres can and do have on a child or a young person's sense of themselves, their self-confidence and their ability to work as part of a team or indeed on their own initiative. We underestimate at our cost the life lessons and skills that can be gained from kayaking, bouldering, rock climbing, or just sitting around the campfire telling stories. And these benefits are tangible. They can be measured, and as Daniel Johnson, Liz Smith and I think others have said, they fit effortlessly with the principles of curriculum for excellence, as well as other key objectives ministers claim are important to this government. As a guiding ambassador, I fully endorse the arguments made by Girl Guiding Scotland in their briefing about the role of outdoor learning in addressing gaps in attainment, but also in helping improve mental health and well-being at a time when COVID restrictions are taking their toll. Girl Guiding Scotland argue that, quote, having access to nature and green spaces, the chance to try something new and make lifelong memories with their peers, help to rebuild children and young people's confidence and resilience. A few minutes talking to those fortunate enough to have attended the Guide Cottage in Orford in my constituency will be left in no doubt about this. Indeed, it's a theme that Children First also pick up in their briefing, informed by their work with some of the most vulnerable children and young people in our country. Deputy Presiding Officer, outdoor education has faced challenges for a number of years now. The fact that we've now reached crisis point at precisely the moment when outdoor centres should be coming into their own is the cruelest of ironies. The asks from the sector are clear, specific and reasonable. We need direct support to outdoor centres to help with fixed costs and staff salaries. We need an increase in third sector resilience funding. We need a review of the blanket ban on residential trips. We need to promote to teachers and schools outdoor education sessions and day trips. At a time when preschool and nursery children are being encouraged down this route, we risk creating a cliff edge once they reach primary school, as outdoor centres are forced to close their doors. Ultimately, though, Presiding Officer, we need our outdoor centres and outdoor education. I thank Liz Smith for allowing Parliament an opportunity to spell out that message and urge the Government to respond positively and with urgency to the plight faced by this vital sector. Thank you.
Before I call Mr Balfour, still got quite a few members who would like to speak in the debate, so I'm happy to accept a motion under Rule 8.14.3 that the debate be extended by up to 30 minutes. If you would
Move, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The question is that the debate be extended by up to 30 minutes. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. And I now call Jeremy Balfour to be followed by Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I won't take the full 30 minutes you've just given as an extension. But I do want to start by, again, declaring an interest like other speakers have, because as a child growing up, I benefited both from going on school trips, but also summer holidays, going to outdoor centres and learning to do lots of things that perhaps I wouldn't have been able to do staying here in Edinburgh. And I want the same for future generations. I want the same for my daughters. They are meant to be going in the spring for their first outdoor week with their school. I suspect that will be cancelled. But for future generations, we have to secure that. And I think that is the crux of the debate tonight. What legacy will we be left with post this virus? Because there is a real danger that we end up with a lot fewer outdoor centres than we have at the moment, which will then ultimately mean that when we get back to some kind of normality, fewer school children will be able to go because the numbers will be less, and inevitably those who come from more difficult backgrounds will probably be left behind again. And so I think we need to make sure that the legacy that we secure is that these outdoor centres remain open and functioning into the decades ahead. I think there's also another danger which hasn't been picked up by other speakers yet, is that the short-term danger is that we lose the expertise of many of the staff that work in these centres. I've been grateful for a number of conversations with different centres over the last couple of days. And that was how they started. It wasn't about buildings, it wasn't about structures. It was about what do we do with the people that have the expertise, whether that's mountaineering, whether that's sailing, whether that's canoeing, whether that's skiing, whatever that expertise is, that can go very quickly. This is
Edward Mountain.
Thank you. The expertise is not, as you've just alluded to, the fact of the skills of taking people rock climbing or canoeing or the other things. It's actually dealing with children, and that comes from years of experience of actually seeing people in situations. Are you worried, like I am, that that will be lost as well?
Jeremy Balfour.
I think that's a very fair point made by Mr Mountain, and a very good point to make. But that does disappear. That they decide to go off and find other jobs in other areas. And so when these centres hopefully do reopen, there's simply not that expertise there anymore. Now again, we can debate how that should happen. We can debate who should pay for it. But we have to make sure that when these centres reopen, the staff are there to make sure that the children are looked after, but given that experience, as Mr Mountain has said. I have a second ask of this government. I understand that, quite rightly, residential accommodation is probably difficult at the moment, if not impossible. But many of these centres can offer day trips, day activities for schools and for young people. And I know the Scottish Government have issued guidelines on this and they've gone to local authorities. But again, from conversations I've had from within the sector, they are simply being ignored by local authorities, or they've been made to make it so difficult that schools can't do this. And I would ask the Minister, as he reflects on tonight's debate, on whether he would go back and look at these guidance, look at what conversations you can have with COSLA, look at what conversations you can have with local authorities to keep these centres, even if it is for only day trips at the moment, going, which will protect it. Yes, this is going to cost money, and yes, the Minister and his government always say opposition parties stand up and simply ask for money. But in this case, it is money that we need to find to save that legacy for future generations. Thank you, Deputy President Officer.
Claudia Beamish, please, followed by Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. My thanks go to Liz Smith, MSP, for bringing this debate to the Chamber and the inspiring call she gave in her speech, Save Our Outdoor Centres. Scotland's residential outdoor centres have been a key feature of Scottish education, as we've heard from other members, for well over 50 years, providing extremely valuable learning experiences for our children and young people. A residential learning experience provides opportunities and benefits that simply cannot be achieved in any other educational context or setting, and of course they can be life-changing. Concerns have been raised with the Office of Children and Young People's Commissioner Scotland about the long-term loss of outdoor educational opportunities for children. And the Office have highlighted that outdoor education is an important part of the rights of education set out in Articles 28 and 29 the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. It is a disappointment that we have to be here today with the backdrop of wider job losses and rising inequality to learn that the staff of outdoor residential centres will be under threat of redundancy by mid-2021, and that 50% of centres will be closed permanently if they are not without urgent support. The Scottish Government issued guidance that no school residential trips can take place. With no residential overnight trips allowed, the main income stream has been cut off from most centres. Outdoor centres have to be closed until March 2020 with little or no income. There are no plans to review this, as I understand, until January, leaving the sector perilously underfunded. In a normal year, 105,000 children in Scotland get the chance to experience a residential trip through school. It is often said in this Parliament that we want Scotland to be the best place to grow up. The poverty-related attainment gap will be increased through the lockdown period, and outdoor education should be a vital tool in supporting young people back into education. As a former teacher, I've accompanied pupils on so many trips, and I'm clear that these should form part of every pupil's educational experience. Children from both rural and urban areas can benefit greatly. For many children, it's the first opportunity to experience staying away from home, a scary prospect. But often by the end of the week, as we've heard from others, they come back reinforced and reinvigorated with confidence. For some from urban areas, it's the only opportunity to visit the countryside. Also, children with additional needs can build confidence and independence out with their normal school attendance. And a report by the Scottish Outdoor Centre suggests that children develop a wide range of qualities and skills that can apply in different settings and also to enhance their future employability. Outdoor centres such as Whitehall Park in the South Scotland, which I visited in 2014, provides children with the appreciation of the world around them. They learn skills that can be gained from the natural world. And I also want to highlight the precious opportunity for challenged groups. For several years, I joined the Young Carers Festival at Broomlea near West Linton, where young carers were able to chill and share experiences with each other while having a lot of fun, even creating their own radio station. What the centres need is support through the winter until they are able to open again. This would enable staff to be retained and for them to go into schools and support outdoor activities through the winter period. There are bookings for next year already, which means that they can then become self-sustaining again. And I really ask that the Scottish Government listen to the possibility of working in partnership with schools and teachers in the meantime, and provide greater guidance to local authorities to consider the use of accommodation and assets through the winter. Scottish Labour and I will continue to support outdoor education, and I ask the Scottish Government to listen to those very real concerns of those in the sector before it is too late. There are many families who have benefited from outdoor education through the years, and I encourage the whole country to get behind the Save Your Outdoor Centres, as so many have already, and support the campaign to show the strength of feeling that there is. Our young people have faced so many challenges as Scotland gets to grips with the global pandemic. We must be sure that children do not face this crisis and risk the loss of their future outdoor education, and that the Scottish Government steps in to provide financial support through the winter for the outdoor education sector in Scotland. Thank you.
Fulton McGregor, followed by Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I thank Liz Smith for bringing this motion to debate? And I say at the outset, there's very little that I disagree with what Liz Smith is saying, and also the consensual, non-party political manner in which she's approached this debate today. I think it's a very important one, and although these are challenging times for everyone, and it's no surprise that residential outdoor centres are struggling, I think it's something that we do need to look at in the round. And I know myself that this government is very committed to outdoor education, and that was even before the pandemic hit, of course. And I think a point that Liz Smith made in her opening speech is I think that COVID-19 has taught us that, if anything, that outdoors and being outdoors has so many benefits in relation to the virus, but also more generally. And I think that it would be good if how we do it, I mean, is perhaps the Minister to respond to and the Government to look at, but I do think if we can find a way to support these centres to ensure that they're there for when we come out the other side of this pandemic, that would be a really good thing. I also want to thank the briefings that I got from the Scouts, and also a chat with Callum Holt, as well as being a director on the Scouts board. He's also a constituent of mine. I think it was good to hear from him make it clear the dire situation that the Scouts and other outdoor residential centres find themselves in, and to be able to explain that and just a bit about where they are. So, having heard that, I can hear that there is a need for some form of support, because I think we all understand the risks that would be around young people going to residential gatherings just now, particularly in light of the restrictions that have been made today. But perhaps there's maybe other support that's required to ensure that they are there, as I said earlier, when we come out the other side. Like other members have said, Presiding Officer, I'm a big supporter of outdoor residential education. From my own childhood, I was in the Boys Brigade and had some great experience in going to, although the BBs never owned any of the centres, they would sometimes hire them out. And even Coatbridge to Lanark's only, I think, 17 miles, but I remember one of the first ones was to Lanark, and it seemed like such a big deal. It was amazing, But I was lucky enough to get those experiences, and then also with a family we went camping and stuff as well. But I know that a lot of young people, particularly maybe in deprived areas, don't get those experiences. So it's important that we keep those opportunities there. And I wanted to speak a wee bit as well about my time as a social worker, and particularly in justice social work. Nothing impacted kids and young people more, I felt, than when they were accepted on outdoor programmes. outward bound trust, for example. Absolutely fantastic. You know, young men particularly, getting involved in offending, perhaps a sort of low-level offending type behaviour. They do the work, the preparatory work to go away in some of these trips, and it can really be life-changing. And I think, you know, as a social worker involved in the casework of these things, it was always a real win for you if you managed to get, you know, a successful application for a kid to go in one of these, because you knew the impact that it could have. So again, that's you know, just another way in which these resources are so valuable. Presiding Officer, I'll just finish by quickly mentioning Kilbowie. As you would expect, as a North Lanarkshire MSP, Kilbowie benefited every kid in North Lanarkshire for a long time. And obviously, along with thousands of other people, I was bitterly disappointed in the decision recently to close it. The decision was taken before the pandemic, and I had hoped that the pandemic, the early stages of the pandemic, might have changed the council's mind. But alas, I think that the decision had been made, and we were now on a path, even despite myself writing to John Spinney, we were on a path where, you know, of no return, which is a real shame. The council have said they'll set up something locally at Strathclyde Park, so you know, obviously as a local representative I'll hold them to that, but I do want to pay tribute to my colleague Councillor Kirsten Larson, who has fought this, and just to say, MD is watching it out there, that the Kilbowie building is still open to community interest and bids at this point in time, and I think it's a certain amount of period, so I really hope that something would come up in that angle as well. But I can see you asking me to stop, Presiding Officer, and I'll close at that. Thanks very much.
Thank you. We're all getting a bit over this 4 minutes, I have to say. I'm worried we're going to run out of time again. Brian Whittle, followed by Colin Smith.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I also add my congratulations to my colleague Liz Smith for securing time in this chamber for us to debate what is, I think, an incredibly important issue. Now, Deputy Presiding Officer, Glesnock House, 1981, will forever remain tattooed on the inside of my head. 2-day geology O-level field trip that had us examining the igneous intrusion that was the Lugar Sill, traipsing through the lead mines under the Lugar Hills, trying to scare the living daylights out of our teachers and our classmates, surviving on about 10 minutes sleep in 2 nights, and being present in a classroom when the class was asked what the first living thing on earth was, for a certain classmate to stand up, who shall remain nameless, and declare that the first living thing on earth was a brontosaurus. Of course, that's the way my mind works. I just envisage this empty world with nothing, and then all of a sudden this 50-ton brontosaurus appears from thin air. Now, that would have been something to behold, Deputy Presiding Officer. Now, you may think this story would be a reason not to allow pupils anywhere near a residential outdoor trip, but so many years later, just last year, nearly 40 years later, one of the first topics that an old friend of mine and I spoke about, a friend I hadn't seen for many years, was exactly that trip, with much hilarity. Shared experiences, Deputy Presiding Officer, a phrase that I've used very often in this place. And of course, we did learn an awful lot as well, it should be added, and in an environment that cannot be replicated in a classroom. And that, of course, is the point, affording our pupils as many learning opportunities as possible, including that experiential learning. And then we all learn and inspired in different ways. Some can do that from a book, and some by listening to others. But without doubt, the best way to learn is by experience. The current pandemic is understandably sucking the oxygen out of the room, where it's difficult to consider anything other than what the next restrictions may be, or how we can remain as safe as possible. COVID, we must recognise there will be a time after COVID. And in all the turmoil that we're currently working through, we have to consider what we want our community to look like then. Outdoor learning, especially in these outdoor centres that are specifically set up to enhance the educational experiences of our pupils, must be part of that. And especially has been mentioned by others for those less well-off communities, because these are the pupils that are less likely to have those opportunities. Now, you know, I managed to take my youngest away for a few days to Crieff in one of those outdoor centres, swinging through the trees in the pouring rain, quad biking, and the only downside for me was the first person that I bumped into there was Anasawa. Now, my fear is that we're on a path that will lead to hugely reducing learning opportunities, and that will exacerbate inequalities. And we must retain our residential outdoor centres as a matter of priority, because if we lose them, they will be next to impossible to replace, as others have said. In fact, I would go so far as to say that looking forward to a residential outdoor course could go a long way to tackle the anxiety that pupils will be feeling at the moment. And I know it was a huge disappointment that to my youngest and her classmates when they had to cancel their P7 trip to Lockerbie before the summer holidays. That is an experience they will now never had. And my eldest had a hugely rewarding experiences by going to work in Camp America and teaching Americans how to horse ride. Now, I've spoken many times in here about the attainment fund and using that to access the transport and out to outdoor learning centres. And I really do believe that COVID has cost us so much. Let us make sure there is opportunities for our children after COVID, such as most of us have talked about the experiences that we've had after this crisis subsides. It is important, Deputy Presiding Officer, that it is maintained for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you. Colin Smith, please, followed by Alison Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I also echo the thanks to Liz Smith for bringing this incredibly important issue to the Chamber. Presiding Officer, the announcement today that the easing of lockdown has in many ways gone into reverse is a sobering reminder that COVID-19 hasn't gone away. Talk of eradication has been replaced by talk of suppressing the virus to the lowest possible level and keeping it there. So I get the fact there needs to be restrictions on our everyday lives, and I get the fact that many of those restrictions will be with us for some time to come. Much is said about those restrictions being based on the science, and I don't dispute that the First Minister and others will be conscious of the scientific advice they receive when it comes to the incredibly difficult choices they have to make. But ultimately, we know that every decision is a political one. As the number of cases of COVID-19 initially began to fall, the government had an element of headroom, and ministers were able to make decisions on which areas to prioritise when it came to easing that lockdown. There's no list of the perfect order that easing should be carried out in, but there is a list of choices. When it comes to outdoor education, Presiding Officer, I do genuinely have difficulty understanding the choices the government continue to make. I have difficult understanding that a choice was made that, for example, a group of 10 or 20 or more older adults who may have never met each other before can all go on a weekend trip together for shooting, but a class of school children who may well spend the week together in the classroom are not allowed to spend more of that precious time benefiting from outdoor education. I could describe exactly what those benefits to those children are, but I'm not going to. I'm going to let them do the talking. Pupils at Belmont Primary School in Stranraer recently wrote to the Deputy First Minister to tell him just what Abernethy Barcable Outdoor Centre, located in the beautiful secluded hills near Castle Douglas and Kirkcudbright, means to them. Emma from Primary 7 said, "I built up my confidence and overcame challenges while staying away from my parents. I'm shy, I find it hard to make friends, but staying in a room with different girls I don't know so well boosted my confidence and helped me to make new friends." In another letter, Declan said, "I had the best experience of my life at Barcable. My memories will last forever. Going to the outdoor centre helped me with so many new skills. It's also good for your mental health because of all the fresh air and freedom you get from being outside." They also produced a wonderful video on YouTube that I could very much recommend to members. And you only have to listen to those young people to appreciate what outdoor education means for them, to see what they are missing out on. So if the government have made a choice, no doubt because they believe it's the right choice to make when it comes to their priorities for easing lockdown, and providing that residential experience does not fit with those priorities, they do need to deal with the impact of those choices. Because if you allow the sector to collapse, you'll not just be denying today's pupils from Belmont Primary the benefits of outdoor education, you'll be denying future generations, depriving them of the opportunity to gain lifelong skills and benefit from the unique experience that outdoor education equips them with. The sector desperately needs support, and it desperately needs that support now. As Daniel Johnson highlighted, many have not been able to access any of the financial support available to businesses and other third sector organisations. They are very much the forgotten sector. Scouts Scotland have warned they are set to lose £2.3 million this year alone, a collapse of income happening right across the sector. And Outward Bound have warned that once centres close, they will close forever. That would be a tragedy at any time, but as Liz Smith rightly highlighted, at a time when our children are facing part of their childhood growing up in the shadow of this pandemic, when the benefits of outdoor education on the mental and physical health of those children is arguably needed more than ever before, it would be an absolute travesty if the government did not recognise the urgency of this crisis, if they did not do more to provide the sector with the support they badly need and save our outdoor centres, not just for today's children, but for generations to come.
The last of the open debate contributions is from Alison Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'd like to thank Liz Smith too for giving us the opportunity to discuss the threat facing Scotland's fantastic residential outdoor centres, and the threat, of course, to the experienced, well-qualified staff who help make them so special. From our world-famous Highlands to our brilliant beaches to the Pentland Hills here in Lothian, Scotland is blessed with some of the most spectacular outdoor space in the world. The pandemic has led more of us to get out into the outdoors, but it's also highlighted how vital it is that we ensure that everyone knows how to behave, how to be when we're in those forests, those mountains, beaches, seas and waterways in a way that's safe and sustainable. And outdoor education plays such an important role in this. You know, Scotland was an early pioneer of outdoor education. It was one of the first countries in the world to formalise it as part of children's learning. And today, every year, some 105,000 young people and children, they go on outdoor residential trips, they go on day outings. And Edinburgh Council's 3 outdoor centres, Benmore Outdoor Centre near Dunoon, Lagan-Lea near Aviemore, I should say I'm a friend of Lagan-Lea, and the Bangham Centre right here in Edinburgh provide outstanding access to walking, mountain biking, water sports and other activities, while the Bridgegate Hub on the canal at the Calders in the west of the city, it's not a residential centre, but it provides canoeing and kayaking to school groups and people of all ages who might otherwise not have such an experience. And it's quite right that the Curriculum for Excellence recognises that learning in the outdoors can make significant contributions to literacy, numeracy and health and well-being. You know, if a curriculum doesn't include outdoor learning, it's not excellent. Research from Learning Away shows residential outdoor learning provides opportunities and benefits that can't be achieved in another educational setting. And the Scouts in their briefing tell us that outdoor learning is particularly beneficial to those who struggle to engage with more formal education. It can help close the attainment gap. And if you're still not convinced, and I know that colleagues across the chamber are, then a social return on investment analysis shows that every pound spent by the Scottish Environmental and Outdoor Education Centres Association generates over £11 of environmental and social benefits for young people. And the latest Scottish Health Survey shows no improvement in the sedentary time spent by children since 2015. That's 5 years. So we need to ensure that each and every child and young person can access outdoor educational opportunities. And that requires us to preserve our outdoor centres for this and future generations. Sadly, we've already lost Girl Guiding Scotland's Neverard Centre in West Linton, and many other centres have reached out to MSPs in advance of this debate to warn that some aren't getting any financial help beyond the job retention scheme and that they need urgent assistance. So outdoor learning, it should be much more than a one-off residential. The Scouts are right to point that out in the briefing. And who would disagree that it's a hugely underused resource? School residential weeks are a highlight of our education system. For some young people, often those on low incomes, this may be a journey to another world, where they discover strengths they never knew they had, where they're challenged in ways that build resilience. Now, we know that establishing and running outdoor centres is a complex operation. It requires investment. And if we lose some centres, some, I am afraid, will be gone forever. And so I join colleagues calling on the Scottish Government to do whatever it can to provide financial and any other necessary support to our fantastic outdoor centres. And I know that the government appreciates input on where this cash might come from. Well, just a few weeks ago, my colleague Andy Whiteman's research revealed that 9 out of 10 of Scotland's shooting properties, including some owned by billionaires, receive non-domestic rates relief worth £10.5 million. So I would suggest, Minister, that if we can afford that, there's money to support outdoor centres to get our young people cycling, kayaking, hill walking and much more. And while, of course, keeping our children, young people and their teachers safe, we need to be looking at whether the guidelines issued to schools are unnecessarily restricting access to outdoor education at a time when access to exercise and learning outside classrooms couldn't be more important. Right now, we've got organisations like the Water of Leith Trust and the Green Team at Tynecastle in Edinburgh keen to offer outdoor learning to schools, and schools enthusiastic to take up the offer, but they're currently unable to do so. With social distancing even more important as a result of today's announcement by the First Minister, it's time to consider what greater role outdoor education can play in the lives of our children and young people, as surely it is easier to maintain safe distances learning outdoors than in the classroom. I'm beginning to wind up, Presiding Officer. Scotland has a long and proud history of supporting children and young people's access to the great outdoors. We need to build on that, not abandon it. I would ask colleagues across the party if they might be interested in considering forming an informal cross-party working group to ensure that we take forward the work that has begun this evening as a result of Liz Smith's debate. To close, Presiding Officer, I pledge the full support of the Scottish Greens to the Save Your Outdoor Centre campaign. Thank you.
I now call Richard Lochhead to respond to the debate for as long as you like. Minister.
Thank you for that prompt, Presiding Officer. The COVID-19 pandemic has led to a very significant challenge for our entire education system in Scotland. But it is absolutely right that the issues faced by our outdoor education centres have been given appropriate consideration today, and I add my thanks to Liz Smith, MSP, for bringing forward this very important debate. And the benefits of outdoor centres have been articulated very eloquently by members from right across this chamber. I think the number of members that participated illustrates the strength of support for Scotland's outdoor centres, and I couldn't agree more with virtually all the sentiments from across the chamber as well. Outdoor education experiences do make an absolutely vital contribution towards a rich and impactful education for our young people. And I was listening closely to many of the points that members were making, and Maurice Corrie, I think, summed up very well many of the skills that people can acquire from participating in residential courses. He spoke about the social and communication skills, and of course it helps the self-confidence, the self-esteem of our young people as well. And I listened closely to his story about his visit to my constituency in Murray. And I will forgive him for discarding a cigarette butt out of the train at Elgin railway station. I'm sure it's biodegraded over the last 50 years or so since he was there. However, he did make many important points about the benefit of outdoor centres in Murray, and indeed many members refer to their own outdoor centres across the country as well. And Liam MacArthur mentioned the important role that outdoor education plays in helping our more vulnerable young people in Scotland as well. And Fulton McGregor spoke from the perspective of his experience as a social worker in the justice sector and how it can help the people he was working with as well. And Alison Johnson just there in her speech spoke about how it can help in terms of outdoor education, helping those who are perhaps find it more difficult to engage in more formal education settings as well. So I think we all agree on the many benefits of outdoor education. And like Bruce Crawford, my own children have taken part in residential courses at Alton-Creech, in this case, at Aviemore, and I saw the benefits they gained from their experience of that outdoor education. And I've got my own personal experience. When I was 18 and secured my first full-time job, my employer had the foresight to send me in a residential outward-bound course at that time, and I recall meeting people from different backgrounds to my own, and the group discussions that we had, where we had to open up about ourselves and where I was pushed out of my comfort zones, both mentally and physically. and had an unparalleled introduction to the spectacular Scottish outdoors, the hiking, the traversing of one of Scotland's great lochs in a Canadian canoe, and abseiling for the first time as well. And that amazing few days that I experienced a lifetime ago, it seems, I still recall today, and I still recall the profound impact it had on my young self at that time. Yep.
Liz Smith.
I'm extremely grateful to the Minister for giving way, and I couldn't agree with him more, and you're echoing exactly what every member has said. Given the cross-party agreement on this, is the Minister minded to accept the suggestion that was made by Alison Johnson to have an urgent working group to see if we can address this problem?
Richard Lockhead.
I will take that on board, and I am coming to some of the steps that we perhaps could take moving forward. But there is no doubt that outdoor centres do help to support learners' health and well-being as well as their attainment. And they do provide learners with these valuable opportunities to spend time outdoors and be physically active at the same time. So that is why the Scottish Government has been supporting the work of the Scottish Advisory Panel for Outdoor Education over a number of years. It's why we have promoted the role of residential centres to all of our schools as part of the broad and rich education offered by the Curriculum for Excellence. And it is fair to say that no MSP in this chamber, no minister, no education authority and certainly no outdoor education centre would wish to face the dilemmas that are now posed by COVID-19. The Scottish Government has continued to work closely with representatives from the outdoor education centres throughout this crisis to look at how we can navigate through the current difficulties. The positive contribution of outdoor learning and outdoor centres featured throughout our COVID-19 recovery guidance. Earlier this year, our Scottish Government provided additional funding to the advisory group to develop fresh guidance on the positive role of outdoor education centres, and that guidance, as others have said, was published in August. And our officials have helped to facilitate engagement between the sector and COSLA and the Association of Directors of Education, because it is, after all, the role of individual education authorities to decide their approach in their local areas and to then fund that approach appropriately. And just last week, Education Scotland published a new professional learning resource on outdoor learning. Now, the question of funding, of course, goes to the heart of this debate, has been raised in the media and during the course of many speeches today. A range of funding sources have been made available to complement the funding through local authorities and schools. Third sector organisations that run outdoor education were able to apply for support through our £25 million Third Sector Resilience Fund. We alerted outdoor education centres to the up to £5 million available in fully flexible 0% interest loans, starting at £50,000 from Social Investment Scotland. We've got the newly created £3 million Youth Work Education Recovery Fund that was announced in mid-September, which of course also contains an objective to support outdoor education. And we've had funding through the Scottish Attainment Challenge and pupil equity funding that others mentioned as well, which of course continues to play its role in helping to fund outdoor education visits by schools across the country. And a number of third sector outdoor centres may be eligible to apply for funding under the forthcoming Community and Third Sector Recovery Programme as well. And finally, as others have also mentioned, outdoor education centres have been able to access financial support through the UK Government's Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme. And today's debate simply reinforces the case yet again for that scheme to be extended. Now, the centres are campaigning to access additional dedicated support funding, and that's an entirely reasonable campaign for them to mount. I don't need to tell anyone in this chamber, as Bruce Crawford referred to, about the very significant pressures on the Scottish budgets at the current time, unprecedented challenges that we're facing. There are huge demands in the public purse at the moment. I know my own inbox has had 3 different sectors over the last 24 hours or 48 hours looking for support packages as well, and we receive representations on a very regular basis given what people are going through and what organisations are going through at the moment due to the COVID-19 crisis.
Jamie Green.
Apologies to Mr Whiteman, I believe it was a race to stand up there. Notwithstanding the financial pressures that I know that all governments are facing, notwithstanding the funds that the Minister has mentioned that are available, it still remains the case that up to half of outdoor learning centres may still close as a result of their financial pressures. Just before the debate, and apologies members may not have seen it, but the Children and Young People's Commissioner Scotland issued a notice, and they are asking if a child rights impact assessment has taken place around that. We wouldn't close primary schools in Scotland without undertaking such an assessment. We must do the same here with outdoor centres. Can the Minister confirm that the Government will fully investigate any potential closure before allowing it to happen?
Richard Lockhead.
As the members are aware, there's a number of different models out there in terms of how the outdoor centres are operated. Some are local authorities, some are third sector, some are private, and so on and so forth. And we don't have the influence perhaps the member thinks we have in terms of which institutions close or not. However, I've not seen the Children's Commissioner's communication, and we'll certainly look at that and take it on board, I'm sure. You know, the Scottish Government absolutely recognises the very difficult position that many of our outdoor centres find themselves in at the moment. And the Advisory Panel on Outdoor Education has asked if a review date can be identified for a further examination of the COVID-19 guidance in relation to overnight residential stays. And again, other members have referred to that. And I'm sure, again, the Chamber will recognise the difficulties for us at the moment in setting a review date at a point in time when the COVID-19 cases are on the rise in Scotland, and as we're beginning to come to terms today of the profound announcement from the First Minister earlier this afternoon. However, we will continue to monitor the situation very, very closely. I think an area of policy where we can take further action is the apparent inconsistency in application of the current guidelines and some very good practice in some areas which could or should be shared more widely amongst local authorities and others. And again, members have mentioned that. It is the case that some authorities and schools are perhaps not taking full advantage of the opportunities for day visits, for instance, and some are ruling out all residential overnight stays for the entire school year. So in recognition of the compelling case that has been made by the sector, I will of course commit that Scottish Ministers will engage further with the advisory group and with local authority partners as soon as possible to address those issues raised today and during the debate on this issue over the last few weeks. I also think there's more we can do to highlight very clearly and prominently what can be done under current regulations and to see what can be done to develop a more consistent and positive application of the current guidance across Scotland's local authorities. We are listening very, very closely to the points made today in this debate. We are listening very, very closely to the outdoor education centres in Scotland. I pay tribute to all their efforts, all their resilience at the current very difficult times, and the support they're giving to our young people and their professional commitment to and dedication to outdoor education. It's an important part of Scotland's education landscape, as highlighted by many members. We will, of course, look in detail at different funding mechanisms that are available at national and local level, and will explore how these funding streams can be deployed more effectively. This has been an important opportunity to highlight the role that outdoor centres do play in Scotland, and we must recognise the urgent challenges they do face at the present time and explore what more can be done. We do remain a very powerful supporter of the role outdoor education centres play, so I just want to finish by paying tribute to the sector, thanking all members for their contribution, and assure members we are listening very closely to the representations.
That concludes the debate and the meeting is closed.